The Cheyenne and Black Hills stage came in late on the 14th of September, 1877, and the woman who got down from it was wearing 6 months of mourning. Black bombazine over a black silk underskirt. No bustle in that year, the natural form silhouette long and severe. And she carried a black leather Bostonian traveling case that contained, among other items, 346 pages of her late father's personal court papers. She was 27 years old, 27 by her own letters, 28 by the New York census of 75, which had been taken before her last birthday and which she would have cause to consult on the matter later. Her name was Helena Cartwright. Her father, Hiram Joseph Cartwright, had been an Associate Justice of the New York Supreme Court until the morning of the 11th of March that same year, when he had finished his coffee, set down the cup, asked his housekeeper for a second cup, and died of a pneumonia he had not previously mentioned to anyone in the family. He left 2 daughters, a Manhattan townhouse, an investment in the Erie Railroad, 3 trunks of legal correspondence, and 1 problem he had not solved in his lifetime. She had come to Deadwood Gulch to solve it. The stage driver, whose name was Bingham and who had been pulling the Cheyenne Black Hills route since the Custer surveys of 74, took down her trunks with the deliberate slowness of a man who wished to be tipped twice. She did not tip him twice. She paid the agreed fare, no more, in $20 Liberty gold pieces, which was the currency Deadwood preferred that autumn. Banknotes were trusted only as far as the next assayer's scale. Bingham loaded the last trunk and looked at her. He looked at the bombazine. He looked at the leather case. He looked at her gloved hands, which had not yet touched the trunks or the wheel of the stage or anything in the street except the iron handle of the door. "Ma'am," he said, "this here is Deadwood. It ain't no place for a Boston widow." She corrected him quietly. "New York, Mr. Bingham." She did not turn her head. He stared at her for a long second. Then he laughed, briefly, the kind of laugh that admits nothing and means everything. "Same difference," he said, and walked his team toward the livery. It was not the same difference. Bingham would discover that across the next 10 days. So would 7 other men. The records on this stretch of road for that particular autumn are not complete. What does survive? Fragmentary manifests, scattered passenger lists, a single hotel ledger written in the kind of careful clerk's hand that one no longer sees, is held at the South Dakota State Historical Society in Pierre. The handwriting on Helena Cartwright's entry on the manifest is steady, the ink slightly browned, and the listed weight of her baggage, 312 pounds, would not have been remarkable, except that the line's standard upper limit for a single passenger was 150. She had paid the surcharge in advance by draft on a New York bank. The bank no longer exists. The draft does. Deadwood, in September of 1877, was a town of perhaps 4,000 persons, half of them transient miners, the other half divided between merchants, freighters, prostitutes, gamblers, and a small population of women, perhaps 200, who were called, with no irony intended at the time, the respectable sort. Lawrence County had been organized earlier that year. The new territorial sheriff, a man named Seth Bullock, lately of Helena in Montana, had taken office that spring. The streets had names but no signs. They had wooden boardwalks only on 3 blocks of Main, and only on the side that faced the gulch. The other side of Main was mud, even in September, even in a dry year. She walked down the boardwalk side. She carried the leather case herself. 2 of her trunks she had left with the stage office. The third, the smallest, plain black canvas, banded with a single brass strip, She would not surrender to any porter, and she carried it in her left hand for the entire walk to the Standish Hotel, which was 340 paces of boardwalk and mud, of which I have walked perhaps 200 myself one summer in the dust of a dry July afternoon, and have a fair idea of what it asks of a woman in a corset. The Standish in 77 was the best of 3 lodging houses in Deadwood, which is not a high standard. It was 2 stories of pine board, painted once. It was run by a Mrs. Eliza Stoddart, who had come from Cincinnati 2 years earlier, and who, by the testimony of every traveler's diary I have seen from that period, ran the cleanest dining room west of the Missouri and the most expensive coffee, 50 cents a cup, at a time when coffee in Cheyenne was 10. Helena gave her name at the desk. Mrs. Stoddart, looking up, registered something, recognition, surprise, calculation, I cannot tell which from the diary entry that survives, and asked her to sign the register in a particular ink, which was kept under the desk in a sealed bottle and used only for guests whose names Mrs. Stoddart wished, later, to remember. She signed, Cartwright, Helena J., New York. She did not list her father's title. The boy who came out from the back to take her trunks up was thin, perhaps 15, with the open-mouthed expression of a child who has never seen a black silk hem before in his life. He took the smaller trunk first, which was the heaviest, which was the wrong one, and he dropped it on the boardwalk before he had taken 3 steps. Helena did not react. She picked up the trunk herself, set it inside the door, and asked the clerk, politely, in the tone that in New York would have been used to a footman who had spilled tea on a visiting cousin, whether he could fetch the manager. He fetched Mrs. Stoddart. Mrs. Stoddart fetched the right boy. The right boy fetched the trunks. The whole exchange took perhaps 4 minutes. The men sitting on the porch of the Standish, there were 3 of them, 3 or 4. The accounts disagree by 1. All loosely connected to a freighting outfit whose name I will come to in a moment, watched it all. One of them, the one with the broken nose, called out, quote 4. She turned. She regarded him for the length of one breath. Then she said, in a voice perfectly pitched for the porch and the street and no one further, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 5, underscore, underscore. She went inside. The man with the broken nose, his name was Harry Plummer, no relation to the Bannock Plumbers, a Pittsburgh freighter who had drifted west after the Panic of '73, sat very still on the porch for the next half hour. He was later heard, by another diarist, telling a friend that he had been bitten by something in a black dress and was not sure he had felt the teeth go in. That was the first afternoon. If you came here for stories of women who carried their books in one hand and the right grammar in the other, the small button beneath this video keeps them coming. That is all I will ask of you. The rest is in the records. Helena's room at the Standish was on the 2nd floor, 2nd door from the stairs, with a window facing Main and a heavy bolt on the inside of the door, which was a thing Mrs. Stoddart had installed personally after a guest in '76 had been disturbed at 3 in the morning by a man who had walked into the wrong room. Helena unpacked the canvas trunk herself. She did not allow the porter back in. The trunk contained a writing portfolio of red Russian leather given to her by her father on her 21st birthday, an India paper edition of Coke upon Littleton, the 17th century treatise on real property law, which she had read at 15, a set of letters from a New York attorney named Lemuel Sturge, a sealed envelope marked in her father's hand, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 6, underscore, underscore, which she had opened in March, and a small object wrapped in oilcloth that I will describe when its turn comes. The letters from Lemuel Sturge dealt with the case of People versus Crane, indictment of February 1876, conviction in April, execution by hanging at the Tombs in Manhattan on the 11th of June of that year. The defendant was Owen Crane, 29, of Brooklyn. He had been convicted of the murder of one Edward Liddell, 58, a Pearl Street importer of South American hides. The case was straightforward, the verdict swift. The appeal denied. Justice Cartwright, Helena's father, had pronounced the sentence on the 17th of April. Owen Crane had not killed Edward Liddell. This was the problem. Helena's father had not known this in April of 76. He had begun to suspect it in May. He had been confirmed in his suspicion on the 7th of June, 4 days before the execution, when he had received a letter from Owen Crane through Sturge, the attorney of record. He had read the letter twice. He had filed it among his private papers. He had not stayed the execution. Whether he had not stayed it because he believed the letter was a desperate fabrication, or because he believed it was true, and judged that the public reputation of the New York bench was the greater good, or because he had been ill already by then and did not trust his own judgment. The diary entries he kept that month do not say. Family law disagrees with the surviving record by one significant detail. Helena's elder sister Margaret, who lived in Albany, believed their father had not believed Owen. Helena, on the morning of the 11th of March 1877, when she opened the sealed envelope, came to a different conclusion. She believed her father had believed Owen. She believed her father had carried that belief, unacted upon, for 9 months, and that it was what had killed him. She decided to finish the case. The letter from Owen Crane, written from his cell at the Tombs on the 2nd of June, 1876, named his elder brother Silas Crane as the actual perpetrator of the killing on Pearl Street. It named the dates, the times, the disagreement over a shipment of Argentine hides, the place at which Silas had hidden the pocket watch he had taken from Liddell's body, an inner pocket of a sea chest in a freighter's office on Fulton Street, and one further detail, which was the document Owen had drawn up before fleeing the city, signed in his own hand and witnessed by a notary public named Hosmer Vance, in which he set down the facts of the killing and named his brother. Owen had hidden that document, with the watch and certain other items, in a strongbox of his own design. He had sent the strongbox west by Adams Express in February of 76 to an assay office in a town he had heard described by a Black Hills miner who had been drinking next to him at a Bowery saloon. The town was Deadwood. The assay office was Tuthill and Company on Lee Street. Silas Crane had vanished from New York in April of 76. By the time Owen's confession letter reached Justice Cartwright in June, Silas was already west, through St. Louis, by river to Yankton, by overland stage to Cheyenne, by Black Hills line to Deadwood. By the autumn of that year, he owned a small freight company. By the spring of 77, he owned an interest in 2 saloons. By September, when Helena stepped off the stage, he was 42 years old, a man of moderately good standing in the Deadwood business community, with 7 men in his employ, 4 of whom had been with him in New York, and 3 of whom he had hired locally. He had not yet recovered the strongbox from Tuthill and Company. He had been waiting. He had been waiting because the proprietor, a man named Erasmus Tuthill, had received the box in March of 76, addressed to one Owen Crane, with strict instructions for its release, and because Erasmus Tuthill, whatever his vices, there were several, and they appear in the back columns of the Black Hills Daily Times in the years after, was a man who honored a sealed box. The box had been signed for. The signature was Owen Crane's. Owen Crane had been executed. Erasmus Tuthill had, on the 2nd of August 76, sent a letter by Adams Express back to New York, addressed to a person at Owen's last known address, asking for instructions. The letter had been returned, 6 months later, undeliverable. The Crane family in Brooklyn had vanished as thoroughly as Silas himself, the elder sister having died in childbirth that autumn, the younger having entered an Ursuline convent in Pittsburgh under a different name. Erasmus Tuthill had kept the strongbox. Silas had tried twice to retrieve it. The first time, in October of 76, he had walked into the assay office and asked for quote, _7, Tuthill had refused. The second time, in May of 77, Silas had sent 2 of his men with a forged letter of authorization. Tuthill had read the letter, taken 3 days to think about it, and refused again. He was now waiting, though Silas did not yet know this, for the next of kin to arrive in person with documentary proof. The next of kin was now in room 2, on the 2nd floor of the Standish Hotel, unpacking a Russian leather portfolio, removing from it a single folded sheet of paper, which was a sworn deposition signed by Lemuel Sturge of New York, attorney of record for the late Owen Crane, attesting that Helena J. Cartwright of New York was the executrix of certain trusts deriving from the estate of the said Owen Crane, and was authorized to retrieve any and all property held in his name by any third party in any state or territory of the United States. The deposition was notarized. The notary's seal was that of the County of New York. The signature was clean. She set the deposition on the desk. She closed the portfolio. She wound her traveling watch, a small gold one, Tiffany, 1866, given to her on her 16th birthday, and she set it on the side table beside the bed, and she went to find the sheriff. The sheriff was not at his office. He was somewhere along the road to Spearfish, where 2 mining companies were disputing a water claim, and he would not be back, his deputy said, until Monday at the soonest. The deputy was a man called Jed Carver, 23 years of age, lean as a willow, 3 months in the office, the son of a freighter. He read Helena's letter of introduction from a federal judge of the Black Hills District to whom her father had written from his bed in February, twice. The second time, slowly. He looked up at Helena. He said, quote, She took the letter back. She thanked him. As she turned to leave, she noticed that the deputy was glancing past her, toward the window, in the practiced way of a young man who has been told to notice things. She glanced where he was glancing. Across Main, at the corner of the Pioneer Saloon, Silas's larger interest, a man was leaning against the doorframe. He was tall, lean, dark-coated, hat low, watching the sheriff's office without disguise. When Helena's eyes met his, he did not look away. He inclined his head, half an inch, no more, and then he turned and went inside. She asked the deputy quietly, "Who is that?" Carver did not look up. "That is Silas Crane, ma'am. He owns the Pioneer." She left the sheriff's office. She did not go directly back to the hotel. She went instead by a slow route down Lee Street, past the door of Tuthill and Company, which was closed in the mid-afternoon and legibly lettered in fresh white paint above the glass. Then up the long boardwalk to the Standish. She walked at the pace of a Boston lady on her afternoon constitutional. She did not turn her head. At the door of the hotel, a man in working dress, gingham trousers, leather vest over a faded blue cotton shirt, hat in his hand because he was already entering the lobby, stepped aside for her. He did not look at her face. He held the door. As she passed, she heard him say, very quietly, in the tone of a man speaking to himself, Quote 11. She did not stop. She did not turn. She went inside and up the stairs and into her room, and she shot the bolt across the door. She did not know who he was. She did not know how he knew her name. She did not know that her 2 remaining trunks, still at the stage office, were already being moved, quietly, properly, without notice, to a small locked room behind the Standish kitchen, where Mrs. Stoddart kept the linen. She did not know that the man with the hat in his hand had paid Mrs. Stoddart $12 in advance, 3 days ago, on the strength of a telegram, for the discreet handling of any luggage belonging to a Miss Cartwright of New York, should one such arrive on the September stages. She would learn most of that within 48 hours. What she did know that evening, with the bolt across the door and a single candle lit on the writing desk and the Russian leather portfolio open before her, was 3 things. Silas Crane had recognized her. Silas Crane had men. And the assay office of Erasmus Tuthill was 420 paces down Lee Street, around 2 corners, and Silas's men were watching it. There was a knock at the door at 7:30 that evening. She did not open it. She asked, through the bolted door, who was knocking. The voice on the other side was a man's voice, polite, Eastern in inflection, the kind of voice that has been trained out of any roughness it might once have had. It said, Quote 12. She let 12 seconds pass before answering. I have spoken to women who knew Helena in her later years, and they say that her habit, when challenged, was to count to 12 before she opened her mouth. She did so now. She said, Quote 13. There was a brief silence on the other side of the door. Then Augustus Webb said, in a voice that had momentarily forgotten its Eastern inflection, Quote 1. 4. Quote 1. 5, said Helena Cartwright through the bolted door. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 16, underscore, underscore. She heard him hesitate for perhaps 4 seconds. Then she heard him walk away down the corridor. She wrote a note. She wrote it in pencil, very small, on a torn corner of a stage-line schedule, in the precise legal hand her father had taught her at 12. The note said, Quote 17. She sealed the note in a plain envelope. She wrote no name on the outside. She set the envelope on the corner of the desk. She would deliver it herself, at dawn, before Lee Street woke. She would go to Tuthill at 9, retrieve the strongbox if she could, and be back at the Standish before Silas Crane's 4 o'clock invitation became an obligation he believed himself entitled to enforce. The court at Yankton was 4 days away by stage. The federal judge for the Black Hills was due in Deadwood for a circuit sitting in 11 days. Sheriff Bullock would not be back until Monday. Silas would not wait 11 days, nor 4, nor most likely until Monday. She unlaced her boots. She unbuttoned the bombazine. She took, from the oilcloth-wrapped object in the canvas trunk, a small Remington vest pocket Derringer, double-barrel, over-under, .41 rimfire, which had belonged to her mother and which she had carried in her traveling case since Cheyenne. She had never fired it. She did not know whether it was loaded. She set it under the second pillow. The candle she let burn until midnight. Then she trimmed it and slept 4 hours. At 5 minutes after 5 in the morning of the 15th of September, 1877, Helena Cartwright unlatched the bolt of room 2 of the Standish Hotel in Deadwood, Dakota Territory, and stepped out into a corridor lit by a single oil lamp at the far end, and walked, in her traveling boots and her second-best black walking dress, toward the back stairs and Lee Street. She did not yet know that a man in a leather vest had been awake for an hour, sitting on a wooden chair across the corridor, between her door and the head of the stairs, with a Winchester laid across his knees. He did not stand up. He held the Winchester across his knees in the unloaded posture, the lever open by an inch. The barrel pointed at the floorboards 3 feet to the left of her boots. He did not move toward her. He raised one finger to his lips in the universal gesture of quiet, and then he turned the finger and pointed at the head of the stairs, which she could not yet see from where she stood. Then he turned the same finger and pointed at his own ear. She understood. Someone was at the foot of the stairs. She did not move. She listened. The oil lamp at the far end of the corridor made one long shadow of her on the wallpaper, which was a faded pattern of small ferns over a cream ground, the kind of paper the Standish had ordered by mail from Chicago, and which would still be visible in the photographic survey the Lawrence County Historical Society would make of the building in 1941. When the hotel was finally pulled down to make way for a Standard Oil station. I have seen those photographs. The wallpaper at the foot of the second-floor stairs is patched at the top right corner with a strip of newspaper dated October 1878 that someone, Mrs. Stoddard presumably, had pasted over a damaged area. The patch is still there in the photographs, 63 years later. Some things hold. The man at the foot of the stairs did not come up. After perhaps a minute and a half, he went back the way he had come, out through the lobby, the latch of the front door clicking once, then again. The man with the Winchester closed the lever softly. He stood. He did not put the rifle down. He looked at Helena and said, in a voice no louder than the burn of the oil lamp, quote, 18. She did not count to 12. She looked at his face once, sun-darkened, mid-30s, dark hair grown out from a soldier's cut, 3 days beard, grey eyes, and she said, she walked. He led her down the back stairs in the order, him first, with the Winchester, that he would have used coming out of a drawer with hostile ground above him. She noticed. She did not comment. At the bottom of the stairs, behind the kitchen, was the small locked room where Mrs. Stoddard kept the linen, and her 2 stage trunks were stacked against the wall under a folded sheet. Caleb did not stop. He led her through the kitchen. A Chinese cook stood at the stove and did not look up, and out into an alley that ran behind the row of buildings on the Gulch side of Maine. The alley smelled of wood smoke and horses and the slop bucket of the saloon 2 doors down. It was not yet 6 in the morning. The sky over the Gulch was the pale color of weak tea. He set a steady pace. He did not look back. The Winchester he carried at the trail, the way a man carries one when he wishes to be ready and unobtrusive at the same time. He said, without turning his head, ___, quote, _23, ___. Helena said nothing for the length of 2 corners. Then she said, quote, 24, quote, 25, quote, 26, quote, 27. She walked another 4 paces. Then she said, quote, 28, quote, 29, quote, 30, quote, 31, quote, 32, quote, 33. They came out at the back of Lee Street, 3 doors down from Tuthill and Company, by a narrow passage between a livery and a Chinese laundry. Caleb stopped her at the corner with one raised hand. He looked once, slowly, in both directions. Then he motioned her forward. Erasmus Tuthill was already at the door of his establishment. He was 61 years old, of medium height, gone bald above and stout in the middle, in the way of men who had spent 30 years bent over an assay scale, and he wore a green eye shade over a black silk skull cap, both of which I have seen in the surviving photograph of him, taken by the itinerant photographer who passed through Deadwood in '79. The photograph is in the Adams Museum on Sherman Street. Tuthill looks at the camera with the expression of a man who knows the weight of every object in the room without touching it. He held the door open. He did not greet them aloud. He led them through the front room, scales, ledgers, 2 iron safes against the back wall, to a smaller back room with a single high window and a writing desk. He gestured Helena to a chair. He nodded to Caleb. He sat down behind the desk and folded his hands. He said, in a voice with the residue of a Lancashire upbringing his American years had not quite worn off, quote, 34. She showed him. He read them in silence. He read the Sturge deposition twice. He read the sealed letter from her father, Hiram Cartwright's hand, his court seal, his signature she had seen on 1,000 opinions. And he closed his eyes for a moment when he set it down. He read the certified copy of the surrogate's court order from New York County, signed by Surrogate Calvin and dated the 8th of April that year, confirming Helena J. Cartwright as executrix of any property of the deceased Owen Crane that might be discovered in any jurisdiction. He read it twice as well. He looked up. He said, quote, 35, quote, 36, quote, 37, quote, 38, quote, 39. Caleb laughed once, briefly, and stopped himself. Tuthill ignored the laugh. He said, quote, 40, quote, 41, quote, 42. She nodded once. She did not trust her voice for the length of one breath. Then she said, quote, 43. Tuthill considered the question. He said, quote, 44, quote, 45. Helena said, quote, 46, quote, 47. He stood. He went to the smaller safe. He turned the dial in a sequence he did not let either of them see. He opened the door, removed a flat iron box of perhaps 18 inches by 12, sealed at the seam with a circle of red wax bearing an impression Helena recognized on sight. Owen Crane's monogram, O.W.C., in a small Gothic die she had seen on the back of her father's correspondence file, and he set the box on the desk between them. He said, quote, 48. It suited her. It also gave Silas Crane 4 days to act first. Caleb said as they walked out the back of Tuthill and Company into the alley, quote, 49. She agreed. They went for the horses. Lead City was 3 miles from Deadwood by the wagon road and rather less by the cut along the gulch, which was not a road, but a series of mining paths joined by the rough enterprise of the miners themselves. They took the cut. Caleb had borrowed a side saddle from a woman of his acquaintance in Deadwood, a Mrs. Foley, the wife of a freighter, who was the only respectable woman in town with a side saddle that fit a Boston frame, and Helena rode it as it had been ridden by every Beacon Hill girl who had been put on a horse at 6 and had spent the next 20 summers at her family's country house in Lenox. She had not ridden in 2 years. The saddle remembered for her. Caleb watched her on the 3rd switchback and said in the same low voice, "Ma'am, That is the Brookline seat. It is the Lennox seat, Mr. Reed. I stand corrected. They rode the rest of the way without speaking. Tobiah Quinlan was 68 or 70. He was no longer certain himself, and the Leeds City census of 76 had listed him at one number and the assayer's own register at another. And he lived in a one-room cabin on the eastern edge of the camp, with a tin stove, a stack of yellowing assay reports, a bottle that was empty in the mornings and full again by evening, and a black dog that did not bark at strangers because it had stopped barking at anything 4 winters earlier. Quinlan, when Caleb knocked, was sober. It was 8 in the morning. He had not yet started. He looked at Helena. He looked at Caleb. He said, "Quote 53. Caleb said, "Quote 54. Quinlan let them in. He set 3 tin cups on the table. He poured coffee from a pot that had been on the stove for an hour. He sat down. He said to Helena, "Quote 55. Quote." Caleb said, "Quote 56. Quote. Quote 57. Quote." Helena set down her tin cup. She said, They rode out an hour later. On the way back, behind the livery at the south end of Leeds City, Caleb stopped at a small clearing of beaten earth, where, he said, he had been training a young mule for a freight contract the previous spring. The mule was no longer present. The clearing was. He said, "Quote 61, quote 62, quote 63. She accepted this. He took, from a leather scabbard under his coat, a Smith & Wesson's Schofield Model 3, the break-top revolver in .45 Schofield caliber that the cavalry had adopted in '75, smaller in the hand than the Colt Peacemaker, lighter to cock, friendlier to a smaller hand. He broke it open. He showed her the 6 chambers, 5 loaded, 1 empty under the hammer in the cavalry habit. He closed it. He handed it to her butt first. He said, "Quote 64. The lesson took 15 minutes. She fired 3 rounds at a flour barrel at 20 paces, hit it twice, the third going wide left. He did not praise her. He did not laugh. He said, when she handed the revolver back, "Quote 65. Quote 66. She did not, in fact, fire the Schofield at any point in the events of the next week. She kept it in the canvas trunk. Whether it was loaded on the morning of the magistrate's hearing, whether she had cause to wish it loaded, and whether she remembered to check, the records on this point are thin. Quinlan's account, taken down in the '78 deposition for the territorial court at Yankton, says only that she carried a small black silk reticule into the hearing, and that the reticule was heavier than reticules ordinarily were. Make of that what you will. I have stood in the clearing behind the Leeds City livery. The livery is gone. The flour barrel is gone. The earth is a parking lot now, behind a county road yard, and there is no marker. But the wagon path that Caleb Reed used to bring Helena north on the morning of the 15th of September is still there, by the old name, and there is a single locust tree at the upper end of it, that is, by the county's tree census of 1996, 220 years old. It was already old in '77. Helena would have ridden past it. Caleb would have known it. Some things hold. They came back into Deadwood by the same alley they had left it. Mrs. Stoddart met them at the kitchen door. She was carrying a folded telegram. She said, "Miss Cartwright, this came an hour ago. The man who brought it was not the regular runner." The telegram was from Helena's aunt in New York. It was 3 lines. It said, "Silas Crane's attorney in city took steamer Wednesday. Arrives Yankton soon. Name, Reuben Mathers. Care for yourself." Helena read it twice. She handed it to Caleb. He read it once and gave it back. She said, "How long from Yankton?" 4 days by stage if he pushes. 6 if he stops. He will push. He will push. She went up to her room. She wrote, for the first time in her own hand and on her own initiative, a formal, sworn statement, signed and dated the 15th of September, 1877, naming Silas Crane of Deadwood, Dakota Territory, formerly of New York City, as a person against whom she made formal complaint of murder in the killing of Edward Liddell of Pearl Street, New York, on the night of the 22nd of February, 1876, on the strength of documentary evidence to be produced at hearing. She signed her name in the legal hand her father had taught her at 12. She signed her father's name in the column for sponsoring counsel, with the notation, "Deceased, 11th March, 1877, executrix, per surrogate's order, 8th April, 1877. She blotted the page. She sealed it. She gave it to Caleb to give to Deputy Carver at the sheriff's office. She did not deliver it herself because she did not yet wish to be seen with the document on Lee Street. The deputy logged it at 4 in the afternoon. He set it in the wire basket on the sheriff's desk. Sheriff Bullock would see it on Monday morning, in his first hour back in town. By 6 in the evening, the bartender at the Pioneer Saloon, a man named Holcomb, who took 20 cents on the dollar from Silas Crane for information of a certain kind, had walked across to the sheriff's office on a pretext of asking after a stolen wagon, and had read what was in the wire basket while Carver was in the back room. He had walked back to the Pioneer in 12 minutes. Silas Crane had received the report at 6:14. At 7, Silas Crane sent a runner through Deadwood with handbills printed at the Black Hills Daily Times job press an hour earlier. The handbills called a town meeting at the Pioneer for 8 o'clock that evening to discuss, in the wording of the bill, an outside party with Eastern connections lately arrived in this town who, under color of false papers, is attempting to interfere in the lawful business of Deadwood citizens. The handbill named no one. The handbill did not have to. A copy of the handbill was pushed under Helena's door at 7:20. She read it. She read it again. She set it on the writing desk. Caleb knocked at 7:35. She let him in. He stood at the open door, hat in his hand, not crossing the threshold, which was the courtesy of his generation and his service, and the woman in mourning he was speaking to. He said, quote, 73. She said, quote, 74. He said, quote, 75. She said, quote, 76. Quote, 77. Quote, 78. He looked at her for the length of perhaps 4 breaths. Then he said, quote, 79. Quote, 80. Quote, 81. Quote, 82. Quote, 83. She put on her gloves. She set the muff on her left wrist. She picked up the small, folded copy of her sworn statement, which she had made in duplicate in case the deputy's office burned in the night, and she put it inside the muff with the deringer in a small interior pocket she had sewn in Charlestown the week she had bought the bombazine. She did not look at the mirror. At 7:51 in the evening of the 15th of September, 1877, Helena Cartwright stepped out of room 2 of the Standish Hotel for the second time that day, and walked down the front stairs into the lobby and out the front door onto Main, and turned left and started walking toward the Pioneer Saloon. Behind her at 5 paces walked Caleb Reed with a Winchester carbine at the trail. Behind him at 30 paces walked two boys from the Standish kitchen, neither of them armed, neither of them necessary. The street was already crowded. She did not, on the walk, count to 12 at any point. She did not need to. A faro dealer set down a card. That was the sound that everyone in the Pioneer Saloon would later agree, in some way or other, was the moment they had first known something. The card was the Queen of Clubs. It had been on its way to the layout. It did not arrive. The dealer's hand stopped a quarter-inch from the felt. From the doorway, with the September dusk still in her eyes, and the bell of the saloon door not yet quite stopped on its iron leaf above her head, Helena Cartwright stood in her second-best black walking dress with a black silk muff at her left wrist, and she did not move. The room was perhaps 60 feet long, low-ceilinged, smoke-thick, lit by 4 oil lamps with cracked yellow chimneys. There were perhaps 120 men in it. There were 2 women, both employees of the establishment, both standing at the back near the piano, both of whom, by every account I have read, did the most useful thing of the evening, which was to put their hands flat on the piano lid and stay very still. The piano was not being played. It had been played until the bell rang above the door. Silas Crane stood on a raised platform at the back of the saloon, behind a long pine table on which was set a glass of whiskey, an unopened bottle, a leather-bound book that was not a Bible, but had been chosen to look like one, and a folded paper, which was the printed handbill calling the meeting. He was tall, lean to the point of gaunt, dark-bearded, with grey beginning at the jaw. He wore a black wool frock coat over a grey waistcoat and a black silk cravat. His hands, which had been gesturing as Helena came through the door, came to rest on the lectern. He looked at her for the length of one of those long pauses she had learned to count to 12 through. She did not count. Behind her, by 5 paces, Caleb Reed had stopped at the bell. The Winchester was at the trail. He did not raise it. He did not need to. Silas Crane said, in a voice trained for the room and the porch and Main Street beyond it. Helena Cartwright said. She had spoken the entire sentence at the same volume Silas had used, and across the same distance. And her diction had been the diction of a courtroom on Center Street in Manhattan. The men nearest her, those who had been standing in a loose ring around the door, moved back 6 inches without intending to. She stepped further into the room. She did not walk toward the platform. She walked toward the long, polished bar on the right side of the saloon, behind which the bartender Holcomb was standing with both hands visible on the bar top. She stopped beside an empty space at the bar. She set the muff on the bar. She did not take her hand out of it. She said, Quote 86. She drew the folded duplicate of her sworn statement from inside the muff with her left hand. She did not look down at it. She had memorized every line at her writing desk that afternoon. She read it aloud. She named Silas Crane. She named the killing of Edward Liddell on the night of the 22nd of February, 1876. She named the document under seal at Tuthill and Company that would prove the matter. She did not raise her voice on any word. She then read the magistrate's order calling the hearing for Tuesday, which she had had Coltrane sign that afternoon at his office above the dry goods store, and which gave formal notice to Silas Crane personally, his attorney of record if any, and the citizens of Lawrence County. She read it through. She folded both papers. She put them back inside the muff. She said, Mr. Crane, I will see you on Tuesday morning. Silas Crane was a man who had killed a Pearl Street merchant in February of '76, who had let his younger brother hang for it in June, who had built a small commercial fortune in 15 months in a town that ate weakness on sight, and who had not, in any of those months, been spoken to in the manner Helena had just used. He went briefly, the color of skimmed milk. The skim came back as red. He took 2 steps off the platform. Caleb Reed shifted half a pace to the right of the doorway and lowered the Winchester from the trail to the ready. At precisely that moment, by the testimony of the bartender Holcomb, which I trust on the question of timing because Holcomb was paid to know what was happening in the room and when, the front door of the Pioneer opened from the outside, and Deputy Jed Carver came through it. He was not alone. He had with him 2 sworn citizens, one of whom was a freighter named Donnellan, who had no political reason to favor either side, and one of whom was the proprietor of the dry goods store under Coltrane's office, and he was carrying, openly, the wire basket from the sheriff's desk. The basket contained Helena's sworn statement, the magistrate's order, and a 1-line note in the sheriff's hand, which had reached the office by special rider at 5:40 that evening, before the sheriff himself had come back to town. The note was the answer to a telegram Mrs. Stoddart had sent that afternoon, through her cousin in the telegraph office, to the sheriff at Spearfish, advising him of the situation. The note said only that he was 2 hours behind it, and that the town was to be held. Carver read out the note. He held up the wire basket. He said, in a voice slightly too high for his age and slightly too steady for his nerves, __, quote, _88, __. Silas Crane stood very still for the length of perhaps 8 seconds. Then he sat down behind the long pine table on the platform. He set his hands flat on either side of his whiskey glass. He said, in the practiced voice that returned to him with the practiced gesture, quote, 89. The room did not empty all at once. It emptied in the way a room of that kind empties, in 2s and 3s, the men nearest the door first, the men at the back last, the 2 women at the piano going out behind the bar through a door that opened on the alley. Holcomb stayed at his post. Silas Crane stayed at the table. He did not look at Helena again. The whiskey in his glass he did not touch. Helena nodded once to Carver. She nodded once to Caleb. She walked out of the Pioneer Saloon at the same pace she had walked in. On the boardwalk, halfway back to the Standish, she put her right hand inside the muff for the first time that evening. The Deringer was where she had placed it. She had not, at any point in the meeting, touched it. She had not, by Caleb's late account, even adjusted the silk lining of the muff once. The sheriff was back in Deadwood by 10 that evening, on a horse that had been ridden too hard for the last 6 miles and would not work again for 3 weeks. He went directly to his office. He read what was in the basket. He sent the deputy out for 2 more men to stand the night outside the Standish and outside Tuthill and Company. He went to the Standish himself shortly afterwards, and he asked Mrs. Stoddart to wake Miss Cartwright, which Mrs. Stoddart did not have to do because Miss Cartwright was in the lobby with her portfolio open on a side table, writing. He sat down opposite her without removing his hat. He read her papers in 12 minutes. He looked up. He said, Miss Cartwright? Sheriff. On Tuesday at 9. Yes. You will not be in this hotel between now and then, except in the parlor with Mrs. Stoddart present, or in this lobby. Mr. Reed is welcome to call. No other male caller will be admitted to your room. The 2 men outside are mine. If you wish to walk out, you will walk out with Mr. Reed in front and Carver behind. Do you accept this? I accept this. With one revision. I will require Mr. Coltrane this evening, before midnight if it can be arranged, to confirm in writing the procedural order I am about to draft, which will set out the manner in which the strongbox is to be opened and the order in which the depositions of Tuthill, Quinlan, and any witnesses Mr. Crane wishes to call will be taken on Tuesday morning. I do not wish Mr. Crane's attorney, when he arrives, to find any aspect of the procedure open to motion. The motions must be foreclosed before Mr. Mathers steps off the stage. Bullock looked at her for the length of perhaps 3 breaths. He said, "You have made a sheriff of Lawrence County agreeable to your terms, ma'am, on the first occasion of his meeting you. Mr. Coltrane will sign whatever you draft before midnight, or I will know the reason. Good evening to you." He stood. He touched his hat. He left. Reuben Mathers, Esquire, of the New York firm of Mathers, and Sloan, arrived in Deadwood at 4 in the afternoon of Monday, the 17th of September, 1877, on a special fee stage from Yankton that had cost his client $120 to commission. He took rooms at the second best of the town's lodgings because the Standish was, by the time of his arrival, considered Helena Cartwright's territory. He sent his card to her room at 5. The card was returned, with a courteous note in her hand stating that she would meet his procedural motions at the magistrate's office at 9 the following morning, and that she would not be available for private discussion. The note was sealed in the same envelope as a copy of Coltrane's procedural order, with the relevant passages underlined. He read the order at 5:20. He sat down. He poured himself a brandy. He drank half of it. He read the order again. He poured the second half and did not finish it. He did not sleep more than 4 hours that night. I have a copy of his letter back to his New York firm, dated the 20th of September, in which he reported on the Tuesday hearing. The letter is in the Legal Historical Collection at the New York Historical Society. The first paragraph reads, in pencil draft with 3 crossings out. Gentlemen, I have been outmatched on procedural grounds by a woman of 27 who has never appeared in a court of any kind, and who at present has no license to practice law in any state of the Union. The deficiency is mine, not the law's. I should have stayed in New York. The hearing convened at 6 minutes past 9 on the morning of Tuesday the 18th of September in the back room of Coltrane's chambers above the dry goods store on Main. The room held perhaps 15 people, 8 of them by the law's interest. Coltrane sat at his desk. Sheriff Bullock stood at the door. Carver stood at the back window. Tuthill sat with the iron box on his lap. Quinlan sat next to Tuthill, sober, in a clean shirt provided by Mrs. Stoddart's nephew, with a written confirmation from Mr. Tuthill certifying the firm's receipt book entry of the 2nd of March, 1876, recording the receipt of an Adams Express box from New York. Silas Crane sat at the right-hand bench. Reuben Mathers sat beside him with 3 of his motions ready in a slim portfolio. Helena Cartwright sat at the left-hand bench, alone, with her father's writing portfolio on the table in front of her, and Caleb Reed standing behind her at the wall. Coltrane opened the proceedings. He read aloud the procedural order he had signed at 11 the previous night. He invited motions. Mathers moved to dismiss for want of jurisdiction. He argued with considerable competence that a sworn statement of murder relating to an event in New York County in February of '76 could not properly be heard by a justice of the peace in Lawrence County, Dakota Territory, in September of '77. He cited federal precedent. He cited 2 territorial cases. Helena Cartwright stood up. She did not approach the bench. She remained at her bench. She held no notes. She said, quote, 98. Coltrane nodded slowly. He said, quote, 99, quote, 100, quote, 101. Mathers moved that Helena Cartwright lacked capacity to act as executrix on the grounds that the surrogate's order had been issued on the strength of a will and codicils whose testator, Hiram Joseph Cartwright, had been demonstrably ill during their final emendation. He produced a letter from Helena's father's physician in New York, certified, dated the 6th of February, 77. Helena Cartwright let him finish. Then she said, "Mr. Mathers's letter concerns my father's health, not Owen Crane's. The will under which I am acting is not my father's will. It is the will of Owen Crane, deceased 11th June 1876, of which I am executrix not by my father's appointment, but by the surrogate's order of the 8th of April. The order was sought on the basis of a sealed letter from the deceased and the deposition of his counsel, Mr. Sturge. My father is not party to it. Mr. Mathers's motion misidentifies the testator." Coltrane looked once at Mathers. He said, "Misidentified." Mathers withdrew the motion. There were no further motions. Tuthill set the box on the magistrate's desk. Quinlan affirmed, on the book, that he had received the box on the 7th or possibly the 8th of March, 1876, that the wax seal had been intact, that the seal bore the Gothic monogram OWC, that the box had remained in the smaller safe of Tuthill and Company without interruption from that date to the present, and that he was prepared to be cross-examined on any point. Mathers did not cross-examine. He had reached by then the part of the morning at which an experienced attorney conserves what is left. Coltrane invited Helena Cartwright to break the seal. She did so with a small ivory paper knife she had carried in the muff. The wax broke in 3 pieces. The hinges of the box gave with a small grating noise that the room heard and remembered. The contents were laid out one at a time on the magistrate's blotter. They were: 1 signed and notarized statement in the hand of Owen Crane, dated the 23rd of February, 1876, witnessed by Hosmer Vance of New York, notary public, setting forth the facts of the killing of Edward Liddell on the night of the 22nd of February, 1876, and naming Silas Crane as the killer. 1 pocket watch, gold, hunter case, English movement, engraved on the inside lid with the initials E.L. and the date of marriage, 1846. 1 linen cuff, detached, stained with blood that had darkened to brown, marked on the inside in indelible ink with the laundry mark of Mrs. Ferraro's establishment of Brooklyn, which had served Silas Crane's address until April of 1876. 1 receipt from Cohen's pawnbroker, Bowery, New York, dated the 25th of February, 1876, for $40 advanced against an English movement gold hunter watch deposited by 1 S. Crane of Brooklyn. The watch on the receipt was identified by serial number as the watch on the desk, and 1 letter, sealed separately in the hand of Owen Crane, addressed to Justice Hiram Cartwright of the New York Supreme Court, requesting consideration of the case after Owen's own execution, and acknowledging that the writer had elected, in the absence of any other course that protected his brother's young children, to allow the verdict to stand. Silas Crane looked at the letter for the length of perhaps 2 seconds. Then he stood up. He stood up in the way a man stands when his weight has gone out of his legs and he is using the table to find it. He said, ___, quote, __, 104, ___. The sheriff said, quote, 105. Silas sat down. Coltrane did not retire. He did not need to. He ruled from the bench in the form of a finding of probable cause, on the strength of the documents and the witnesses, sufficient to bind Silas Crane over to the territorial grand jury at Yankton on the charge of murder in the first degree in the killing of Edward Liddell, with notice to the United States Attorney and to the New York County District Attorney for whatever further proceedings might lie. He set bail at $30,000, knowing Silas could not raise it, knowing this was the point. The sheriff took Silas into custody at 11:10 that morning. Mathers gathered his portfolio in the silence of a defeated man whose firm would, on his return, ask him hard questions about the trip. He took the papers without speaking. He left the room. I have stood at the corner of Sherman and Main, where the dry goods store and Coltrane's chambers above it had been, and the building is no longer there. It burned in the great Deadwood fire of September 1879, 2 years to the day after that hearing. But the foundation stones are still in place under the present brick building, and the staircase that led up to the magistrate's office is partly visible from the alley, if one knows what to look for. I am not certain that any one tourist passes through Deadwood in a year who knows what to look for. I do not mind. The stones know. Helena Cartwright closed her father's portfolio. She closed the iron box. She did not speak to Silas Crane on his way out of the room. She walked down the staircase from Coltrane's chambers into the dusty noon of Sherman Street with Caleb Reed beside her. They walked together as far as the corner. They stopped. He took off his hat. He did not say anything. He stood there with the hat in his hand, in the Eastern courtesy, before her, on the corner of Sherman Street, in the September sun. She looked at him. She said, "We said," he said. He took her hand. It was the first time. He held it for the length of perhaps 3 breaths. Then he let it go. They walked back to the Standish together, the hat he carried at his side. The Winchester he had left at the magistrate's office, which was the first time in 8 days he had not had it within arm's reach. Silas Crane was extradited to New York